Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Sibley.
Even though we sit feet from each other every day, I'm very happy to be now talking to you about the International Gender and Transitional Justice Symposium we had a couple of months ago at the very beginning of February in Tunisia. And we had so many really interesting women come and join the symposium from 8 different countries. We had women, for example, from Lebanon who have been working for decades on the search for the missing and the disappeared in Lebanon. We have several women who are working with wives and mothers of disappeared, not just in Lebanon, but also in Sri Lanka, in Nepal. We have women who are working directly with sexual violence victims and survivors. And I thought it would be a really nice opportunity for us to reflect on some of our favorite moments, some of the things we took away, some of the lessons.
And we should say, for those listening, that the symposium came about out of a project we had done for the government of Canada. And so it was a nice small group of individuals that we were familiar with, but also got to know better.
Yes. And before we go any deeper, I guess we should also more formally introduce ourselves. So that was Kelli Muddell that you just heard.
And that was Sibley Hawkins. I would love to talk about some of the highlights from the conference. Something that we even remarked on while the conference was taking place, that we both found kind of really wonderful about it, was the amount of inspiration that the participants got from one another. And I should say that this felt very different than other conferences I've gone to. I think other conferences have been inspiring, but there was something, I think, about the way this conference came together and the participants that there was sort of an immediate bonding that happened, and a sense of solidarity among the participants that really allowed sharing that instantly went to a very deep level.
I fully agree. I was really moved by the way that participants came in from the beginning really focusing on the similarities between them and their shared struggle, their shared cause, even though they were coming from such different places. And on that note, I'm wondering if there were any specific connection between certain participants that really stood out to you.
A lot of people talked throughout about our participant from Lebanon, Wadad Hulawani, who had been working for 36 years to sort of get the government of Lebanon to address the issue of enforced disappearances. And it was only last year that they passed a law to do so, and her just tireless effort to push for that. I think it was really interesting, having myself worked in Tunisia for a while, and for Tunisia, the participants from Tunisia who were at a point in their own sort of evolution of the transitional justice process there, where the Truth Commission had just closed down doors the month before, and they're feeling very frustrated by the amount of political backlash they are getting and the whole process is getting in terms of setting up additional mechanisms for reparations. And I think it was, a lot of them said to me how for them it was really useful and inspirational to hear about all the different contexts and how transitional justice doesn't happen in the course of just a few years. That even if there's a law that says all these mechanisms need to be set up, there are frequently delays and political resistance. And it was helpful for them to sort of situate their own context in the context of these other ones, to say this is actually not necessarily a failed process, because it seems like a lot of different countries have gone through this and have still achieved some sort of results.
You bring up a lot of really great points about what was discussed, but what was so nice about this space was that for every challenge that was discussed and every obstacle, there were also discussions about, well, what needs to happen to overcome these challenges? What kinds of support do these organizations need to be doing their work? I think one of the really clear messages that came from probably all of the participants from all 8 countries is that donor governments, international NGOs not unlike ICTJ, really need to be doing more to support especially the smallest, most local, most grassroots organizations, particularly when we're talking about gender and women's rights groups, trying to work to channel more of that funding to these smaller organizations, but then also helping them to develop institutionally. We actually have a clip of Jette Krasniqi, who we recently met in Kosovo, making that point very clearly.
The work that we're doing back at home, civil society organizations, or even TJ mechanisms, we look forward to future cooperations, but our suggestions are that this work and the support that comes from abroad, from outside, should be based on the needs of the community, that there should be sustainability between project, and that we should work on increasing the expertise and capacity building also within the NGOs themselves, or even the existing mechanisms. Even empowering existing mechanisms from the beginning, or even activists and NGOs from the first steps, are very important, because it is through this way then that their voice will be amplified and that their impact will be bigger for their target group, because we are all in this together to make TJ processes more just, more dignified for the victims. To give voice to the victims, but also to offer them the best do no harm practices, but also guarantees, so that we turn the page of the past by dealing with what has happened to them, but also that we guarantee a better future, non-occurrence, but also justice.
So while I think everyone really enjoyed the symposium and found it inspirational, it was also, there were a lot of serious discussions that were had and a lot of sobering moments. And I think that one of the takeaways or main topics of discussion was contexts in which there are supposed to be transitional justice processes that are taking place because they've been promised by the government, say in Sri Lanka or Uganda, but they've been stalled or are not happening at the pace they should. And so women's groups, in their fight for justice, for accountability, are having to work at a subnational level. And I think one of the nice things or interesting things about hearing from a lot of these contexts and these women was the creative ways in which they're doing that, to use sort of grassroots efforts to push the justice agenda. And I think even in Tunisia, where you've had a Truth Commission process, and there hopefully will be a reparations and process, that there are certain voices that have not been represented as they should be, or at the level they should be in the Truth Commission process. So even there has been a sort of turn to more artistic means or documentation efforts to try and get those voices into the public sphere. Because really it's about the public discourse of what happened in the past and trying to capture that. So, Sibley, what was one of your favorite or most inspiring moments from the symposium?
I think one in particular we both loved was the session that Jaya Luntel, one of our longtime partners from Nepal, who heads the organization Story Kitchen, led.
Yes, that was such a great session, and I really loved it, and I think all the participants really enjoyed it. And I have to say, as someone who is not always fond of participatory group activities, I was a little nervous going in, but what it was is with what her organization does in Nepal is to use clay and ask victims what their conceptions of justice are. And then they mold that clay into what their individual conception of justice is. And then that gets put in the center and of the circle that they form. And then from there, they work together to build a story of justice. And so she ran this. It was one of the last sessions we did in the symposium. And it, outside of having to figure out whether or not we could bring clay on an airplane or not, or we had to actually buy it there, it was flawless in the way it ran. I think one of the things that I found interesting comes back to, I think, what we were talking about in the beginning, and actually throughout this whole podcast, which is how the participants' individual stories related to one another, what they got from them, but how they sort of built upon each other's experiences. And so one of the participants had created, for her conception of justice, a black hole, because to her it represented the void of any possible justice for women in her country right now. The participant to go directly after her was someone who created a sun. And so when she went to put her clay object down in the middle of the room, she put it on top of the black hole as a gesture of there is hope. And at the end, when we all came together to build this story of justice, we all were able to weave together these different concepts into a story arc of justice that really sort of built upon one another, but also strengthened each other's individual concepts of justice into a stronger narrative of how you achieve that. And I think it was a really nice session to have at the end, and it was something that I think a lot of us will probably consider using in future workshops we do in different countries.
I completely agree. I also really loved that session. I think it really was beautiful in the way that it showed that justice is both individual and collective. So I think we could end maybe with a quote from another of our participants, Shreen Sarur from Sri Lanka, that sort of sums up that sentiment probably better than either you or I could do.
One of the common things that I learned and also resonate with my sisters, it's been how we women look at justice, particularly in relation to social justice. It is not in the courtrooms that we seek justice. The justice, the way that women are demanding justice differ. It also collective justice that we are talking about. It more often human rights or justice being defined to individuals, but very interestingly what came out of this workshop is that we are breaking the boundaries of how the transitional justice processes have been defined. We are trying to redefine the transitional justice processes, and we are also talking about transformative justices, particularly in relation to structural imbalances and unequal laws, constitution. So we are questioning a certain way of looking at justice or making justice realize in our countries. To the donors, we also have knowledge. Oftentimes, West dominate with the knowledge and resources. And what I saw in our conversations have been Global South having that rich knowledge of collective realization of rights. What we as women's groups here have discussed is about collective rights. We are also talking about cultural, economic, social cultural rights, which is very important in the context that we all are coming from. So therefore, for the donors to consider that the rich knowledge the Global South women's groups have, and make sure those knowledges are being shared among ourselves, gives us that opportunity. And also, like, we have been working on these issues for a pretty long time, so sustainability of our work is a must. We are not here to carry forward the seasonal agendas of donors. It is our work, and if at all donors want to come and work with us, make sure that our work is continued, and therefore we sustain our justice struggle for a long period of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're interested, we will be publishing a conference report soon, and that will be on our website. On our website, you can find more information out about ICTJ's work in country context, in our gender program, and everything else we're doing. And you can find that all at ictj.org.